The moment you realize someone else is living the life that was supposed to be yours is the moment everything you thought you controlled begins to fall apart. The ballroom glowed in soft gold light, crystal chandeliers casting reflections across polished marble floors as conversations blended into a low, elegant hum. And at the center of it all stood Ethan Caldwell, tailored in a midnight suit that fit like power itself, his name moving from mouth to mouth in quiet admiration, his company logo rotating across a massive screen behind him, his presence as steady and commanding as the empire he had built. But then something shifted, subtle at first. Like a change in air pressure before a storm, his gaze drifting past the investors, past the champagne glasses and polished smiles, until it landed on a figure near the far end of the room, a woman standing just outside the brightest circle of light, composed, still, unmistakable, and for a second his breath caught in a way that made no sense, because 5 years was supposed to be enough time to forget a face, to bury a memory, to rewrite a past. But the moment he saw her, every carefully constructed wall inside him cracked without warning. Amara Brooks stood there in a simple dark dress that didn't demand attention, yet somehow held it, her posture straight, her presence quiet but unshakable, her skin glowing under the soft lights like something untouched by the years that had hardened him. And she wasn't alone. 2 small boys stood at her side, one holding her hand, the other slightly behind her, both dressed neatly, both calm in a way that didn't belong to children their age. And Ethan's chest tightened as his eyes moved from her face to theirs, because it wasn't just a resemblance, it was recognition, immediate and undeniable. The shape of their eyes, the curve of their brows, the way one of them tilted his head slightly as he looked around the room. It was like staring at fragments of himself placed into smaller, living forms, and the noise of the ballroom dulled into something distant, irrelevant, as if the entire world had stepped back to make space for this single, suffocating realization. He took a step forward without thinking, his mind scrambling to reject what his eyes were already confirming. But before he could reach her, one of the boys tugged gently at Amara's hand and looked up at a man approaching from the opposite side. A man Ethan had never seen before, dressed simply but with a quiet confidence that didn't need recognition, and the boy's voice, soft and clear, cut through everything. "Dad." The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed directly in Ethan's chest, heavy and precise, as the man smiled, crouched slightly, and placed a steady hand on the child's shoulder, natural, familiar, earned, and Ethan stopped where he stood, the distance between them suddenly feeling impossible to cross. Because in that single moment, it wasn't just the past that came rushing back, it was the weight of every decision he had made to protect his name, his family, his image, the signature on a document placed in front of him by his parents, the silence he chose over a fight, the woman he let walk away without looking back, and now she stood there, not broken, not waiting, not even looking at him, but living, fully and completely, in a world where he no longer existed. And for the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell, the man who controlled outcomes, who calculated risks, who never allowed uncertainty to linger, found himself facing something he could not manage, could not rewrite, could not buy back, because the life he had walked away from had not disappeared, it had simply moved on without him. The applause continued around him, polite and measured, but Ethan Caldwell did not hear a single clap, his world narrowing to the quiet space where Amara stood with those 2 boys and the man they called father. And for the first time in years he felt something unfamiliar press against his chest, not anger, not confusion, but something heavier, something that did not belong in boardrooms or contracts, something that did not yield to logic. And it made him move, one step, then another, his polished shoes silent against the marble as if the room itself was holding its breath. And when he finally reached the edge of their space, Amara looked up, not startled, not defensive, just aware, her eyes meeting his with a calm that unsettled him more than any accusation could have, because there was no trace of the woman he had left behind, no hesitation, no question, only distance, clean and deliberate, as if she had already lived through this moment years ago and decided it no longer had power over her. And for a second he forgot every prepared word, every practiced line, because nothing he had used to control conversations applied here. "Amara," he said, her name leaving his mouth slower than he expected. Like something fragile he was not sure he had the right to hold, and one of the boys looked up at him, curious, his small hand tightening slightly around the other boy's sleeve, their identical features drawing Ethan's eyes again, the undeniable reflection forcing his next words out before he could stop them. How old are they? The question sounded incomplete even to him, but it was the only one he could reach through the noise in his mind, and Amara did not rush to answer. She glanced down briefly at the boys, then back at him, her voice steady. 5. The number landed with precision, cutting clean through the space between them, aligning perfectly with the years he had spent. Building expansions, closing deals, attending events just like this one. Believing time had moved forward in a straight line, and now it folded back on itself in a way he could not escape, his jaw tightening slightly as the realization settled deeper. Twins, he said, more to himself than to her, and she gave a small nod. Nothing more, no explanation, no elaboration, just confirmation, and the silence that followed stretched, not awkward, not tense, just firm, like a boundary he could see but not cross, until he asked the question he had already answered in his mind. They are mine. It was not phrased as a question, and that was the first mistake, because Amara's gaze shifted, not softer, not harsher, just sharper, and when she spoke, her words carried a quiet authority that stopped him mid-breath. They are my sons, she said, not correcting him directly, but redefining the entire frame of the conversation. And something in Ethan's posture faltered, subtle, almost invisible, but real, because for the first time he understood that biology did not equal presence, that resemblance did not grant access. And before he could respond, the man beside her stepped forward slightly, not aggressive, not territorial, simply present, his hand resting lightly on one boy's shoulder in a gesture that spoke of routine rather than claim, and Ethan's eyes flicked toward him, measuring, instinctively categorizing, but finding nothing to hold on to except the undeniable fact that this man existed in a space Ethan had abandoned. We should go, the man said softly, not to Ethan, but to Amara, and she nodded, the decision already made before the words were spoken, and as she turned, guiding the boys gently toward the exit, Ethan felt the moment slipping in a way he was not used to. No negotiation, no delay, no leverage, just movement away from him, and something in his chest tightened further, pushing him to speak again, this time without calculation. Why did you not tell me? The question came out lower, more raw than he intended, and Amara paused, not fully turning back, just enough for her profile to catch the light, her voice calm, almost distant. You already chose what mattered, she said, and then she continued walking, leaving him standing in a room full of people who still saw him as powerful, successful, untouchable, while everything that actually mattered had just walked out the door without looking back. The doors closed behind them with a soft, controlled click, but the sound echoed louder in Ethan's mind than the applause that had filled the ballroom minutes earlier, and for a long moment he did not move, his body still angled toward the exit, as if standing there long enough might reverse what had just happened. But nothing shifted, nothing returned, and the room around him slowly resumed its rhythm, conversations rising again, glasses clinking, names being called, yet everything felt distant, flattened, like he was watching his own life from behind glass. And when his assistant approached with a quiet reminder about the next presentation, Ethan did not respond right away, his gaze still fixed on the space where Amara had stood, where those two boys had looked at him with curiosity instead of recognition. And that was what unsettled him the most. Not their presence, not even the man beside them, but the absence of anything in their eyes that connected them to him. No instinct, no familiarity, no trace of belonging, just polite distance, the kind reserved for strangers, and that absence followed him out of the ballroom, into the hallway lined with mirrored panels that reflected his image back at him from every angle, sharp suit, steady posture, controlled expression, the same man the world trusted to lead, to decide, to win, and yet behind that reflection something had shifted in a way he could not correct, his steps slower now, less certain, as he reached the quieter end of the corridor where the noise of the event softened into a distant hum, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to stand still without a plan, without a call, without a next move, And that was when the memory surfaced, not gently, not gradually, but all at once, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to break through. The long table in his parents' home, polished wood, untouched plates, his father's voice steady and final. "This is not a discussion, Ethan, it is a decision." His mother's silence sharper than any words, her gaze fixed on him with expectation dressed as concern, and the folder placed in front of him, clean, simple, irreversible. He remembered the weight of the pen in his hand, the pause that lasted just a second too long, the thought that crossed his mind, brief and inconvenient. What if he said no? What if he chose differently? But it passed as quickly as it came, replaced by logic, by structure, by the belief that some sacrifices were necessary to maintain order, to protect what had been built, and he signed, not because he did not care, but because he believed he could recover anything he lost. That time would smooth it out. That distance would make it manageable. And he never called her after that. Not once, not to explain, not to check, not even to confirm she was all right, because silence had been easier to maintain than the truth he did not want to face. And now that silence had returned to him in a different form, standing 5 years tall with 2 sets of eyes that carried his features but none of his presence. And Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand tightening briefly at his side before relaxing again, as if he was trying to release something that had settled too deep to move. And when he finally reached for his phone, his movements were precise, controlled. But there was something beneath them now, something that did not belong to routine. "I need everything you can find on Amara Brooks," he said when the line connected, his voice steady but lower than usual. And there was a pause on the other end, brief but noticeable. "Sir, you asked for all records to be cleared 5 years ago." The reminder landed without judgment, just fact, and Ethan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, long enough to feel the full weight of that decision before responding. "Then start again," he said, opening his eyes to his own reflection in the glass across from him. A man who had spent years controlling outcomes, now standing at the edge of something he could not undo, only face. "I want to know where she lives, where the boys go to school, everything." And as the call ended, the hallway seemed quieter than before, not empty, but waiting, as if something had shifted direction, not in the world around him, but inside him. And for the first time since he had signed that paper, Ethan Caldwell was not thinking about how to move forward. He was thinking about how far back he had already fallen without realizing it. The city looked different the next morning, not because anything had changed in the skyline or the traffic patterns or the steady rhythm of people moving through their routines, but because Ethan Caldwell was no longer seeing it through the same lens of control and certainty. And as his car slowed in front of a modest elementary school tucked between rows of trees, just beginning to catch the early light, he remained still in the back seat for a moment longer than necessary, his hand resting against the door handle without opening it, as if stepping out would confirm something he was not fully prepared to face. But eventually he moved, stepping onto the sidewalk where the air felt sharper, quieter, real in a way boardrooms never were, and across the street he saw them again. Amara standing near the entrance, one hand resting lightly on Noah's shoulder, while Elijah adjusted the strap of his backpack, their small voices blending into the morning sounds. And there was no spotlight. Here, no audience, no polished presentation, just routine, just life unfolding without performance. And Ethan noticed the details he had never allowed himself to consider before. The way Amara knelt briefly to straighten Elijah's collar, the way Noah leaned into her side without thinking, the way she listened fully when they spoke, not distracted, not divided, present in a way that could not be replicated or replaced. And it settled into him slowly that this was what he had walked away from. Not just a woman, not just a relationship, but an entire world built in quiet moments he had never witnessed. And when the boys turned and ran toward the school doors, pausing only once to wave back, Amara's expression softened just slightly. A small smile that did not seek approval, did not need to be seen. And that was when she noticed him, standing across the street. No longer hidden behind glass or distance. And for a brief second nothing moved. Not the cars, not the people passing by, just the space between them holding steady. And then she straightened, not surprised, not unsettled, simply aware, her posture shifting into something composed and contained. And Ethan crossed the street, his steps measured but lacking the usual certainty that defined him. stopping a few feet away as if acknowledging an invisible line. "I was not sure if you would come here," he said, the words sounding more uncertain than he intended, and Amara did not respond immediately, her gaze steady, assessing without hostility. "You were not supposed to know where we are," she replied, her tone calm, not accusatory, just factual, and Ethan exhaled slightly, accepting that truth without defense. "I need to understand," he said, not as a demand, but as something closer to admission. And Amara's expression did not change, but there was a pause, a subtle shift in the silence. That suggested she was deciding whether the conversation deserved space. And when she finally spoke, her words were precise, deliberate. "Understanding does not change what happened." And that sentence held more weight than anything louder could have carried, because it removed the possibility of easy resolution, of explanation as redemption, and Ethan nodded once, slowly. "I know," he said, and for the first time the words did not feel like strategy, they felt like recognition, incomplete but real. And he glanced toward the school doors where the boys had disappeared, the absence already noticeable. "I did not know about them," he added, quieter now, and Amara followed his gaze briefly before returning her attention to him. "You did not ask," she said, and there was no bitterness in it, no anger, just a simple truth that did not require emphasis, and that was what made it land deeper, because it was not about what he had missed, it was about what he had chosen not to see. And Ethan's jaw tightened slightly as he absorbed that, the weight of 5 years not in time, but in decisions, and when he looked back at her, there was something different in his expression, not authority, not control, but something closer to humility, unfamiliar and unsteady. "I want to be part of their lives," he said, and the statement hung between them, not rejected, not accepted, just present, and Amara held his gaze for a moment longer before answering, her voice even, unwavering. "Wanting is not enough?" And with that she stepped back slightly, not retreating, just creating space again, the boundary re-established without force. And as she turned to leave, walking down the sidewalk with the same quiet certainty she had carried the night before, Ethan remained where he stood, the morning light shifting around him. And for the first time he understood that this was not something he could reclaim with intention alone. It was something he would have to earn, slowly, quietly, without guarantees, if it was ever offered at all. That night, the city stretched out beneath Ethan Caldwell's penthouse windows in perfect symmetry, lights aligned in clean grids, traffic moving in predictable streams, everything operating exactly as it should, and yet none of it held his attention the way it once did, because his mind was no longer occupied with numbers or projections or strategies. It was anchored somewhere far simpler and far more unsettling, in the image of 2 small boys running toward a school entrance without looking back at him, and a woman who had already decided what place, if any, he would have in their world. And as he stood there with his jacket draped over the back of a chair and his tie loosened for the first time before midnight, he realized that for all the systems he had built to control outcomes, there had never been a structure for this. No model for earning something that had already been given away. And when his phone lit up on the glass table beside him, the name on the screen pulled him back into a world he understood too well, his father, calling with the same consistency and expectation that had shaped every major decision in his life. And for a moment Ethan watched it ring, the sound steady, familiar, until he finally answered, bringing the phone to his ear without speaking first. "I heard about your appearance tonight." His father's voice came through calm, measured, carrying the same authority it always had, as if distance did nothing to weaken its reach. "You left early," he continued, not asking, simply stating, and Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting to the reflection of himself in the dark glass. "I saw Amara," he said, the name landing between them with a weight that immediately changed the tone of the silence that followed, brief but noticeable, before his father responded. That situation was resolved years ago, and there it was, the word that had defined everything back then, resolved, as if a person, a life, a future could be reduced to something clean and concluded, and Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "It was not resolved," he said, quieter now, but no less firm, and on the other end of the line there was a shift, subtle but real. "Do not revisit decisions that were made for the stability of this family," his father replied, the emphasis deliberate, the reasoning unchanged, and Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, the memory of that same justification pressing against the present moment. "You told me she would complicate things," he said, his voice steady but carrying something underneath it now, something that had not been there before. "You said it was necessary." And his father did not deny it, did not soften it. "It was necessary," he repeated, as if time had only reinforced his certainty. And that was when Ethan spoke again, the words slower, more deliberate. "She has 2 sons. The sentence did not rise, did not demand. It simply existed, undeniable, and the silence that followed this time was longer, heavier, as if even his father had not expected that variable. "That changes nothing," came the response eventually, controlled, dismissive, but lacking the immediate authority it once carried. And Ethan opened his eyes, his reflection staring back at him differently now, not as someone seeking direction, but as someone beginning to question it. "It changes everything," he said, and for the first time the words were not shaped to fit expectations. They were shaped by something internal, something he had ignored for too long, and on the other end his father's tone sharpened slightly. "Do not let sentiment interfere with judgment." And Ethan almost let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, but something close to recognition, because for years he had believed those two things could not coexist, that one had to be sacrificed for the other, and now he was standing in the consequence of that belief, looking at a life that had moved forward without him. "This is not about sentiment," he replied, his voice even, controlled in a different way now, not restrained, but grounded. "This is about responsibility." And the word hung there, unfamiliar in this context, because it was not tied to a company or a contract or a public image. It was tied to something he could not delegate or restructure, and his father did not respond immediately, the silence stretching before he finally said, "You made your choice." And Ethan nodded once, even though the man could not see him. "Yes," he said, accepting that truth without defense, "and now I have to face it." And with that he ended the call, not abruptly, not dramatically, just final, placing the phone back on the table as the city lights continued to move outside, unchanged, while inside him something had shifted direction completely, not toward control, not toward correction, but toward something far more difficult, something that would require time, patience, and the willingness to stand in front of what he had lost without turning away. And for the first time since that signature had dried on the paper 5 years ago, Ethan Caldwell was no longer asking what he could protect. He was asking what he had to rebuild, if it was not already too late. The next few days did not announce themselves with anything dramatic, no sudden breakthroughs, no visible shifts that others could point to and name. But for Ethan Caldwell, everything felt different in ways that were quiet and constant, like a pressure that did not lift no matter where he went. And on the third afternoon after that call, he found himself standing once again across the street from the same elementary school, not in a tailored suit this time, not with a driver waiting nearby, but alone, his hands resting loosely at his sides as children poured out through the double doors in waves of laughter and scattered footsteps. And he watched carefully, not searching the crowd with urgency, but observing, learning, as if this was a world he had never been invited into before and did not yet know how to enter. And when Noah and Elijah finally appeared, moving side by side with the same natural rhythm he had noticed before, something inside him steadied, not because it eased the weight he carried, but because it made it real in a way that could no longer be ignored. And he stayed where he was as they walked toward the sidewalk, Amara already waiting a few steps away, her posture relaxed but aware, her attention fully on them. And when one of the boys pointed towards something across the street, Ethan realized too late that it was him, the small gesture drawing Amara's gaze in his direction again. And for a brief moment their eyes met, not with surprise this time, but with recognition, as if this had become expected, and instead of turning away, she held his gaze for a second longer before guiding the boys forward, crossing the street directly toward him. And Ethan did not move, not stepping back, not stepping forward, simply standing as they approached, the distance closing in a way that felt heavier than any negotiation he had ever handled. And when they stopped a few feet in front of him, Noah looked up first, his expression curious but open, while Elijah stayed slightly closer to Amara, observing more quietly, and Ethan lowered himself slightly, not fully kneeling. but enough to meet their eye level without towering over them. His voice measured, careful in a way that had nothing to do with presentation. "Hi," he said, the single word carrying more intention than any speech he had given, and Noah responded first, a small nod. "Hi," he echoed, simple, unguarded, and Ethan felt something shift at that, something small but undeniable, because this was not rejection, it was not acceptance, it was simply a beginning that had no guarantees attached to it. And he glanced briefly at Amara, as if confirming he was not overstepping, and she did not interrupt, did not guide the interaction. She simply watched, allowing the moment to exist without interference, and Ethan looked back at the boys, choosing his next words with care. "I saw you both at the event the other night," he said, keeping his tone light, not assuming familiarity, not claiming anything that had not been offered, and Elijah spoke this time, his voice softer. "That was a big place," and Ethan gave a small nod. "It was," he replied, and there was a brief pause, not uncomfortable, just new, as if all of them were learning how to stand in the same space without knowing what it meant yet. And then Noah asked a question that landed with quiet precision. "Do you work there?" And Ethan considered it for a moment before answering, not defaulting to status, not expanding beyond what was necessary. "Yes, I do," he said simply, and Noah nodded as if that was enough, accepting the answer without needing more, and the ease of that exchange contrasted sharply with the complexity Ethan had built in his own mind. And for the first time he understood that this would not be about proving anything in a single moment. It would be about showing up, consistently, without expectation. And when Amara finally spoke, her voice calm but clear, "We have to go," she said, not cutting the moment short, just moving it forward, and the boys nodded, stepping back toward her side, and Ethan stood again, not reaching out, not asking for more, just allowing the moment to end where it naturally did. And as they turned to leave, Noah glanced back once, a small wave forming before he followed Elijah down the sidewalk, and Ethan remained where he was, the gesture settling into him deeper than it should have for something so simple, because it was not about what had been given, it was about what had not been denied. And as the distance between them grew again, Ethan Caldwell did not feel like he had regained anything. But for the first time, he felt like he had taken a step that did not come from control, but from something far more difficult, something that required him to remain present even when nothing was promised in return. The following week did not arrive with announcements or dramatic turning points, but with something far more demanding, consistency, and Ethan Caldwell began to understand that the smallest actions, repeated without expectation, carried more weight than any single grand gesture he had ever made. And so he returned again, not just once, not just when it was convenient, but every afternoon at the same time, standing at a respectful distance outside the school, never crossing the line unless invited, never interrupting the rhythm that had already been built without him. And at first, the boys noticed him the way children notice anything new, with quiet curiosity that did not attach meaning too quickly. Noah would glance over and give a small wave. Sometimes Elijah would follow, sometimes he would not, his attention divided between Ethan and whatever story he was telling his brother. And Ethan accepted that, the unevenness, the unpredictability, because for the first time he was not trying to control the pace of something, he was learning to match it. And Amara watched all of this without interference, her presence constant but never obstructing, her silence not passive but deliberate, as if she was allowing the truth of who Ethan was now to reveal itself without guidance or protection. And one afternoon, as the sun dipped lower and stretched long shadows across the sidewalk, Noah slowed his steps instead of walking straight past, his small hand tugging gently at Elijah's sleeve before turning back toward Ethan. "Are you coming again tomorrow?" he asked, the question simple, direct, and Ethan felt it settle into him with unexpected weight, because it was not about the next day, it was about pattern, about reliability, about whether this presence would remain or disappear the way it once had. And Ethan nodded, his answer steady. "Yes, I will be here." And Noah studied him for a second longer, as if measuring something invisible, before giving a small nod of his own, satisfied for now. And that exchange lingered with Ethan long after they had walked away, because it was the first time one of them had reached toward him without being prompted, and he understood that trust was not given in declarations, It was built in moments like that, small, quiet, almost easy to overlook if you were not paying attention. And later that evening, as he sat across from his mother in the formal dining room he had not visited in years, the contrast between that space and the one outside the school felt sharper than ever. The polished table, the carefully arranged settings, the controlled environment where every word was measured before it was spoken, and his mother's gaze rested on him with the same composed expectation he remembered from before. "Your father tells me you have been distracted," she said, her tone smooth, almost gentle, but carrying the same underlying precision, and Ethan did not rush to respond. His posture relaxed in a way that would have unsettled her more than defiance. "I have been present somewhere else," he said instead, and she tilted her head slightly, considering that answer before continuing. "We made decisions to protect you, to protect everything you have now." And Ethan met her gaze evenly, not challenging, not yielding, simply steady. "You protected an image," he replied, his voice calm. "But you did not protect what mattered." And for a brief moment, something in her expression shifted, not enough to break her composure, but enough to reveal that this conversation was no longer following the path she expected. "That woman was not suited for this family," she said. The words familiar, practiced, and Ethan almost nodded, not in agreement, but in recognition of how easily he had accepted that reasoning before. "She was not meant for this family," he said quietly, and his mother's eyes sharpened slightly, thinking he was aligning with her, until he finished, "Because this family could not hold someone like her without breaking her." And the silence that followed was different now, not controlled, not shaped, but real, and Ethan stood a moment later, not waiting for permission, not asking for approval, simply moving forward in a way he had not allowed himself to before. And as he stepped out into the evening air, the weight of expectation behind him felt lighter than it ever had, not because it was gone, but because he was no longer carrying it the same way. And for the first time, the direction he was walking in was not defined by what he had been taught to preserve, but by what he was finally willing to rebuild, one quiet step at a time. It was a Saturday morning when the rhythm finally shifted, not because something dramatic happened, but because something quiet was allowed to unfold for the first time without resistance. And the park was filled with the soft hum of weekend life. Children running across open grass, parents seated on benches with coffee cups warming their hands, sunlight filtering through tall trees in steady patterns. And Ethan Caldwell stood near the edge of it all, not positioned as an observer this time, but as someone waiting with intention. And when Amara arrived with Noah and Elijah, there was no hesitation in her steps, no pause to assess whether he should be there, because at this point his presence was no longer unexpected. It had become part of the background of their routine, and that was the first quiet permission he had earned, not spoken, not declared, but real. And the boys spotted him almost immediately, Noah lifting his hand in a familiar wave while Elijah followed a second later, slower but no longer distant. And Ethan felt that small recognition settle deeper than anything he had achieved in years, because it was not given out of obligation, it was given out of memory. And as they approached, Amara stopped a few feet away, her posture relaxed but grounded, her presence still the axis around which everything moved. And Ethan met her gaze briefly before shifting his attention to the boys. "Good morning," he said, his tone steady, natural now in a way it had not been before. And Noah responded easily. "We are going to play soccer," he said, pointing toward an open patch of grass where a small goal had been set up, and Ethan nodded, not stepping forward immediately, allowing the moment to guide itself. And then Elijah looked at him, his voice quieter but clear. "Do you want to play?" And the question landed without ceremony, without weight in their minds. But for Ethan it carried something deeper, because it was not about the game, it was about inclusion, about whether he was still outside the circle or slowly being allowed to stand within it. And he gave a small nod. "If that is okay," he said, glancing briefly at Amara, and she did not answer with words. She simply stepped back slightly, creating space, and that was enough. And the next moments unfolded without structure, the ball rolling unevenly across the grass, Noah running forward with quick, determined steps while Elijah followed with a more measured pace, and Ethan moved with them, not leading, not directing, just present, matching their rhythm instead of imposing his own. And there was laughter, light and unguarded, the kind that did not require permission, and for a brief stretch of time, nothing else existed, not the past, not the decisions that had brought them here, just movement, breath, sunlight, and connection in its simplest form. And when Noah kicked the ball toward him with more force than accuracy, Ethan caught it with his foot, steadying it before passing it back, and the boy grinned in a way that felt both familiar and new. And Elijah, watching closely, stepped forward next, more confident now, more willing to engage, and Ethan realized that trust was not built in words, it was built in moments like this, where nothing was demanded and nothing was forced. And when they finally slowed, the three of them standing closer than before, breathing slightly heavier, the distance that once defined them had softened into something else, something still fragile, but real, and Ethan glanced toward Amara, who had been watching from a short distance away, her expression calm, unreadable to anyone who did not know her. But there was something there, not approval, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement, and that was when Noah spoke again, his voice carrying a simple certainty that cut through everything else. "You are coming again tomorrow, right?" And Ethan did not hesitate this time, not because he had rehearsed the answer, but because he understood what it meant. "Yes," he said, and the words settled into the space between them, not as a promise he intended to keep for a moment, but as something he was prepared to prove over time. And as the boys turned back toward their mother, the ball left behind in the grass, Ethan remained where he was for a second longer, watching them move together. And for the first time since he had seen them, the distance did not feel like something he had to close all at once. It felt like something he could walk through, slowly, patiently, step by step, without forcing the outcome. And that realization, quiet as it was, carried more weight than anything he had ever controlled before. The next morning arrived softer than the ones before it. The sky stretched in pale blue with light drifting in slowly, as if the day itself was not in a hurry. And Ethan Caldwell stood once again at the edge of the park. But this time there was no tension in his posture, no uncertainty in where he should be, because something had shifted, not in a way that erased the past, but in a way that allowed the present to exist without being overshadowed by it. And when Amara arrived with Noah and Elijah, the moment unfolded without hesitation. No pause, no silent evaluation, just continuation, and the boys ran toward him without waiting, their steps quick and familiar, as if his presence had become part of something they no longer questioned. And Ethan met them halfway, not thinking, not calculating, simply moving in response to them. And for a while the morning passed in small, unremarkable pieces that carried more meaning than anything grand. The sound of their laughter blending with the wind through the trees, the steady rhythm of a ball passing between them, the occasional glance toward Amara who remained nearby, present but not intervening, her silence still the quiet boundary that defined everything. And it was not until they slowed, the game dissolving into quiet conversation, that the moment came, not announced, not built up, just there, simple and unguarded, as Noah stepped closer, his small hand brushing against Ethan's sleeve as he looked up with a thoughtful expression, and then, without hesitation, without weight, in his voice, he said it, "Dad, can you watch this?" And the word landed in the open air with a stillness that seemed to stretch everything around it. Not loud, not dramatic, but complete, and Ethan did not move right away, not because he did not hear it, but because he did, fully, and for a brief second the world narrowed again, not in shock this time, but in recognition of something he had not earned fully yet had been offered in the smallest, most honest way possible, and he lowered his gaze. To Noah, his expression steady but softer than it had ever been. "I am watching," he said, his voice even, careful not to rush the moment, not to claim more than what had been given, and Noah smiled, satisfied, before stepping back to demonstrate whatever it was he had planned, and Elijah followed, glancing once at Ethan, then at his brother, as if confirming that this new word, this new connection, was something he could accept too, and Ethan stayed where he was, present in a way he had never understood before, not leading, not correcting, just witnessing. And when he finally looked up, his gaze found Amara, and she was already looking at him, not surprised, not emotional, just steady, her expression unchanged on the surface, but there was something deeper in her eyes now, something that acknowledged the moment without naming it, because she understood what it meant without needing to define it. And Ethan held that gaze for a second longer, not asking, not expecting, just accepting that whatever came next would not be decided in a single moment, but built over many like this. And when the boys ran back toward him again, their voices overlapping in excitement, the word did not repeat immediately. It did not need to, because it had already settled into something real, something that would either grow or fade depending on what he chose to do. Next, and Ethan Caldwell, the man who once believed that decisions could be made once and held forever, understood now that this was different, that this required showing up again and again without guarantee, without control, without the certainty he had always relied on. And as the morning light grew stronger and the park slowly filled with more people, the three of them moved together across the grass, not perfectly aligned, not fully connected, but no longer separated by the distance that once defined them. And for the first time in 5 years, Ethan did not feel like he was trying to reclaim something he had lost. He felt like he was being given a chance to build something new, one moment at a time. And this time, he did not look away.